Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video by Liminal Spaces. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about Frank Herbert's Dune. My sister-in-law recently read Dune, and I had read it many years ago, so I don't necessarily want to talk about what the book is about because it's been so long since I've read it, and I do want my sister-in-law to make a video talking about her experiences reading Dune. But I did want to talk about really quick the history of how Dune came to be published, which I find is a very interesting story. So our story begins in March of 1945 when Esquire magazine published an unknown author, the first time he had ever been published, named Frank Herbert. And the name of the story was Survival of the Cunning, and it was not a science fiction story, it was an adventure story. Frank Herbert didn't start writing science fiction. He published a couple of adventure stories, with the one in Esquire's, March 1945's Esquire being the first. We don't hear a lot from Frank Herbert as a writer until about 10 years later, when he publishes his first science fiction novel. He serializes it in Analog magazine in 1955. Right after that's been serialized, he actually rewrites the book, expanding it and re-editing it until he comes up with his first science fiction novel, which is sometimes called Under Pressure and sometimes called The Dragon in the Sea. This is my copy. It's not a first edition. It's just a paperback from the 60s by Penguin. The story is about people in the future that live inside a submarine and the psychology of what happens to their minds from living so long in this submarine. It didn't make a huge splash, but it was his first work. After the release of this novel, Frank Herbert traveled to Florence, Oregon, to write an article on the dunes there. Soon, as he was walking around the dunes and studying the dunes, his mind kind of trailed off from the article. The article kind of was forgotten, and he started imagining this world, this space world of Dune, and the fantasy of Dune started to be created in his head. According to mycologist Paul Stamets, during this time Herbert was also experimenting with mushrooms, specifically the hallucinatory properties of mushrooms. He and Herbert would talk quite a bit, and Herbert started explaining how the fungal life cycle was inspiring him to add more to this fantastic dune-covered world that he had invented. He talked about the sandworms and, of course, the spice, and how people could fold space while using the spice. I think it was these hallucinatory ideas that gave the novel such traction and popularity in the late 1960s. He spent the next 5 years of his life revising, writing, and rewriting his Dune World idea. Eventually, he published a 3-part serial called Dune World in Analog magazine. This was from December 1963 to February 1964. These would all be the larger magazines before Analog went digest size. Unfortunately, I don't have any of these original magazines. They're very hard to come by, and after the recent release of the Dune movie, have only gone way up in price. But 1 year later, he produced the much slower paced The Prophet of Dune. And this was a 5-parter that ran from January to May 1965 issues. And these I do have a few of. The most important one for me is the first one, just because of this cover art, which we will see again on the first edition of the novel itself. The cover art is by John Schoner. Forgive me if I've mispronounced that. And it shows, I'll put a better picture of it up here, but it shows 2 people walking amongst a rocky outcropping in a sandy area, and kind of became the first Dune image that we really know. This was also a really very well illustrated. So was the first one, Dune World, which was only 3 installments was really well illustrated, and unfortunately those have slowly gone away. For instance, here we can see a wonderful, looks like a pencil line drawing of a sandworm. One of the first. I mean, I know that, of course, in Dune World, came out before Prophet of Dune, the year before, would probably be the first images we have of them. So eventually, the magazine, halfway through the run of Prophet of Dune, went to digest size, and we get these smaller magazines that were finishing out the Prophet of Dune sections. And these would still have really great illustrations in them. We don't see this illustrated much anymore. So that serial run ended in May of 1965. For the next couple of months, Frank Herbert worked really hard on doing a quick rewrite and expansion of these two different runs, Dune World and Prophet of Dune. And he put them together in one book, and this became Dune as we know it. Dune World was the first book, and the first book in Dune, because there's three. The book Dune is separated into three different books within the book itself. So the first part, Dune World, which was the first serial that ran, became the first book in Dune, and then Prophet of Dune, which is the second serial that ran, became the second two books in the book of Dune itself. Once he was done with this, probably, I would assume, in July, he started sending out the book to publishers. And he sent it to over 20 publishers, and all of these publishers turned him down. And I think that the main reason they turned him down is because the book was super thick. If you look here, you can't really see, I'm sure, exact titles or anything, but look at how thin most of these science fiction books are. Science fiction books were known for being thin, and they were known at this time, when he was trying to publish, for being kind of not children's work, but definitely young men. So nobody wanted to put out the cost of expense to publish something that was thicker than any of this. And suddenly Frank Herbert was asking them to publish something that was incredibly thick. So of course, all 20 of these publishers turned him down. However, eventually a publisher got a hold of him that was the most unexpected of places for Dune to end up. And that was the publishers known as Chilton. These guys, of course, make car manuals. You can find them in garages across the United States. For this, I just went out into my garage and grabbed one from an old car I used to own. And these repair manuals are huge, and they're still publishing them today. Chilton's is very well respected and well known for this, but who would have thought that they would have been the publishers to publish the best-selling science fiction book of all time? But they did. And this is really due to a man named Sterling Lanier. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. If I'm not, I'm sorry. Sterling Lanier, he was an editor at Chilton's, and he had read Dune World and The Prophet of Dune in the analog serials and absolutely loved them. So he convinced his bosses at Chilton to extend an offer to produce Dune, and they accepted it. And in August of 1965, Chilton published the first edition of Dune by Frank Herbert. This is not a first. This is a book club edition. I really wish it was a first, but the first editions go for way, way, way too much. In fact, when it was first published, right here, it would say a price of $5.95. Now, this was in 1965. The last time we've broken this down to see how much this would be in modern equivalency was in 2022. And that is equivalent to a book being $55.25 in 2002. So basically, to the people of that time, this was a $50 book. Nobody was paying $50 for science fiction books at this time. If you look at most of the prices on other books, it's anywhere from $1.95 to hardbacks to all the way down to 35 cents to a quarter for softbacks. This was pricey. And the fact that it was pricey really made it so that it didn't sell well. Although this is a book club edition, it is still a Chilton's book club edition. So this is the actual, you can see the Chilton down here. And if we take off this dust cover, we can see at the bottom that it says Chilton there. So this is a first of the book club editions, and it was published by Chilton. Later, other companies picked this up to do book clubs as well. So that's how a car repair manual company came to publish Dune, which was, and I think still is, the best-selling science fiction book of all time. Unfortunately, it didn't sell well, and within 1 year, Sterling Lanier was fired. He was fired specifically for how much this book cost to produce and how little it brought back. It is strange to think that the person who fought to give us Dune, the novel, was fired for his efforts. But he did well afterwards. He's a known writer in himself, especially in the field of cryptozoology. Although it did not sell well, Dune tied with Roger Zelazny's The Immortal for the 1966 Hugo Award. So it won the Hugo right off the bat. And it also was the first novel to win the newly created Nebula Award. So it won 2 awards that are huge now right out of the gate. They knew that this was incredible work. Although it didn't sell well, it did become a major success a little bit later. The counterculture of the 60s, who were into psychedelics, really connected to this novel, and from there it spread as word of mouth, and that is the beginning of how it became one of the best-selling science fiction stories of all time. Thank you very much for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please click the like button. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe. We'll be making a lot more of it in the future. And thank you very much.